Hello and welcome to the 2019 Brisbane Anzac Day Parade. I'm Craig Zonka. Today we take the time to pause and reflect on the Anzac legacy. What it means to us 104 years on from the landings of Australian and New Zealand troops at Gallipoli. We talk about those qualities of mateship, endurance, courage and sacrifice. We honour those who have served overseas and of course remember those who never came home. And while we may no longer have World War I veterans with us today in Brisbane, it's about saying we will never forget the horrors and brutality of what they endured. Nor will we forget the veterans of today who have served in more recent conflicts. It's about saying thanks. And as we honour those men and women serving overseas, it's also important to reflect on the role the Australian military plays closer to home. And we've seen that here in Queensland. Earlier this year, the Army, Navy and Air Force coming together to help in the relief and recovery effort from the unprecedented floods in North Queensland. Troops were on the ground as people were forced from their homes in Townsville. And in the northwest of the state, a massive operation swung into action to assist flood-affected graziers with fuel and fodder for stranded livestock.
Joint Task Force 646 was a group of Royal Australian Navy, Army and Royal Australian Air Force men and women focused on supporting efforts in Townsville, of course, the terrible floods that occurred there. That was already a major effort that was being undertaken by my counterpart at 3rd Brigade, Brigadier Scott Winter, commanding Joint Task Force 658.
Joint Task Force 658 was made up of all ADF elements here within North Queensland. The preparation time is typically limited when it comes to a crisis. However, we did have contingency forces on standby, which enabled us to get people out the door into the community in support of the police almost immediately.
Around this time, we became aware of the significant flooding and some requests for support from the various communities in northwest Queensland, and then suddenly that turned into an urgent operational requirement.
There is a staff assembly.
And we were given the task on a Friday afternoon.
That's what's going on.
One of the things that was very obvious was that we were into an enormous disaster, the likes of which had not been seen before. This was a huge area. This area was the size of Tasmania, so we're talking about a vast area of operations. We found it difficult to understand whether we were over the ocean or whether we were over a vast inland waterway. It looked like an Armageddon had occurred. At that point we realised that this is a major situation, a major emergency.
Just like the sinews of war are logistics, very much the sinews of a recovery and relief effort are those logistics that sit behind it as well. All up, we had over 2,800 personnel that were directly involved in the conduct of the operation. The extended period of the crisis meant that really it was all hands on deck from the outset, but we had to manage the fact that we had to sustain that effort over a long period of time. We were in there right from the outset, whether it was the door knocking, working alongside the police and emergency services, or at the height of the evacuation, using our armoured vehicles and the small boats platoon. The corporals forward on the ground who could make that judgment call about whether a particular bridge was safe to cross with an armoured vehicle, whether or not it was safe to take a small boat through a particularly treacherous piece of water. That wasn't done from my location. That was a judgment call made by the great leadership right on the front line. The extent of the damage was comprehensive. There's some remarkable imagery of the sheer volume of hard waste and the impact on the families when you see the water having gone through their entire household, the psychological impact of losing your home, the impact of not feeling safe initially. So the impact is felt across a significant number of areas. Hardest part of this whole process was seeing the impact on our local community. Their incredible thanks, their overwhelming sense of gratitude that we were able to be there at that time of need just highlights to us the importance of those risks that we did take at the height of the crisis. Even at the toughest period of the recovery, the smiles on the faces, the can-do attitude of our people, the desire to be part of this community at their time of need really did bring a tear to my eye.
So Joint Task Force 646 in the first instance was given the responsibility of fuel and livestock fodder distribution. The fuel was used by local civilian Rhodesian pilots to distribute cattle livestock feed. Then 646 came in with livestock feed ourselves, and were delivering that through the use of the MH-90 Taipan helicopters. Then the Prime Minister, having been provided the intelligence from the Emergency Management Australia and others, determined that the carcass problem up there needed to be solved, particularly in response to the health and welfare aspects of having large amounts of cattle carcasses stacked up on people's properties. This was a horrific and confronting scene. And that scene was just repeated over and over again, right throughout the region. This mission here was supporting Australians, but I think being there with them, shoulder to shoulder, emphasised that all of Australia was with them.
If I could leave one enduring message for the men and women of Joint Task Force 658, it certainly was never lost on me the incredible courage and initiative that was shown by our people at the height of the crisis.
As the commander of Joint Task Force 646, I feel nothing but immense pride for the men and women that served with me in northwest Queensland.
It's a point of enormous personal pride for me to see the can-do, supportive, positive attitude that the people of our Joint Task Force and the defence personnel in North Queensland bring into this community that we're proud to live in. So thank you all.
It's not the job that they did, but it's the way that they did it. They showed our values. They showed compassion, they showed courage, and they were an incredible team.
Whether it be at home or abroad, today we honour those who serve. Welcome to the 2019 Brisbane Anzac Day Parade. Down the streets of Adelaide Street, and a massive crowd has turned out to pay their respects to those who are still serving overseas and those who have returned, and of course those who never came home. We're seeing the parade start right now, the Navy to lead the parade down the streets of Brisbane. Blue skies overhead, just a couple of clouds, a glorious day in the Queensland capital. Joining me in commentary is Alan Callaghan from the National Servicemen's Association. And Alan, on Anzac Day 2019, 100 years on or more from those landings at Gallipoli, we're now seeing a new generation of veterans as well.
Yes, we are, and also much younger. The World War II veterans aged 18 to 45. Now we're seeing them, men and women, in their 20s and 30s, all wearing active service medals.
We've seen the Queensland Police Service mounted contingent, and now coming into shot, it is the Queensland Mounted Infantry Troop. And you might notice the emu plumes in their slouch hats, Alan.
Yes, they were stationed in the west during the shearers' strike, and to amuse themselves they used to chase down emus and pluck a feather from the hat, from its tail, and then wear it in their hat. And from them it's spread to other units. But it's traditional in the QMI to wear the emu feather.
The Australian Army Band of Brisbane coming into focus down Adelaide Street. A proud tradition, the band. They perform all over the state, not just for military events, but also for the general public.
Yes, and they also are very versatile. They play more than just army marching music. They can play anything up to jazz and rock, wherever they need a music component.
And the parade commanders from the Navy, Commodore Stephen Woodall, who joined the Navy as a 16-year-old cadet. During his career as a warfare officer, he served at sea in a variety of ships, including HMAS Hobart, a guided missile destroyer, and on exchange also with the Royal Navy. And as you look at the history contingent of units of old, uniforms of old, a very different kit to what you'd see in modern times.
Yes, that the uniforms have become much more utilitarian and less ornate, but they are always wearing the uniform as an honour.
And of course, this year marks 80 years since the beginning of World War II. And it was on the 3rd of September in 1939 that the then Prime Minister, Robert Menzies, addressed the country to say, "Fellow Australians, it is my melancholy duty to inform you officially that in consequence of a persistence by Germany in her invasion of Poland, Great Britain has declared war upon her, and that as a result, Australia is also at war. No harder task can fall to the lot of a democratic leader than to make such an announcement."
Yes, only so few years after the end of World War I, with all its losses and all its devastation, Australia was at war again, this time against a different set of enemies. This time the Japanese were the major threat.
Of course, nearly 1 million Australian men and women served in what was World War II. During this period, Australia came under direct enemy attack for the first time in history.
Yes, the Japanese had bombed Darwin, they had bombed Broome, they had bombed Thursday Island, submarines had attacked Sydney Harbour, and they were sinking shipping around the Australian coastline. So the war was no longer far away, it was right on our doorstep. And the Japanese were poised in New Guinea to invade Australia to try to prevent the Americans using it as a base.
The National Servicemen's Pipes and Drums Memorial Band wearing the tartan too.
They were wearing the kilts of the 60th, the Cameron Highlanders, who were the first to defeat the Japanese at the Battle of Milne Bay, 1942.
We're seeing a number of World War II veterans making their way down Adelaide Street in Brisbane, waving to the crowd as they go.
Yes, their numbers, of course, are falling. My dad served in World War II. He was a sapper in the 5th Bomb Disposal Platoon, and their job was to disarm explosives. Now, it must have been a pretty dangerous job because you had to volunteer for it, but Dad came home safely. So I used to go to my first Anzac Day parades were in Coolangatta with Dad.
And it's unimaginable the horrors of what they endured when you look at a day like today in Brisbane and the number of people that are crowding the streets to pay their respects. We have so much to be thankful for now in 2019.
Yes. It's horrific to think what would have happened if the Japanese had reached Australia. I mean, I think in the long term they couldn't sustain it, but they would have devastated certainly North Queensland. So we owe a huge debt to all the men and women who served in World War II, and not only in the Pacific, of course, but also in Europe against the Germans. How many Air Force men do we lose over Germany?
And that's it. Thousands never made that journey home. Today is about paying respects to those who have served, those who still serve today, and we look at the chest full of medals that some of those World War II veterans are carrying.
Well, I was at our Coolangatta State School observance yesterday, and they have a little memorial which has 6 names on it, 4 from World War II. 2 of them were Powell brothers. One was killed on the Kokoda Track, one was killed over Germany, and then another one, Flight Sergeant Dixon, was killed over Bulgaria with the Royal Australian Air Force. Australians served in all theatres of war in World War II, and you never knew where Australians might turn up. But even in World War I, after the end of World War I, there were Australians serving with the White Army in Russia, and one of them, or 2 of them, actually won the VC.
The Australian War Widows Queensland branch marching proudly down Adelaide Street. And I think this is the other thing to be mindful of, Alan, is that it's the families left at home.
Yes, with all those who had a father or brother or uncle who didn't come home. Legacy is a very honourable organisation, and we should be extremely proud of them. It's the only charity in the world that solely looks after the families of fallen defence personnel, which makes it a uniquely Australian story. Legacy first cared for families of the fallen in Brisbane in 1928. Today they look after 6,500 dependents across southeast and central Queensland. In Australia, that's 70,000 dependents.
And I'd like to give a shout out to Mari Canane, a war widow herself, who would be watching at home today on ABC TV. Mari, we wish you were here with us, but I'm so glad that you can be a part of Anzac Day 2019 with our coverage, broadcasting around the state, also streaming online through the ABC Brisbane Facebook page, where you can add your comments, and why not a shout out to someone of your family who has served or may be serving today and you see marching down the streets of the Brisbane CBD. Like you say, the work of Legacy cannot be underestimated, Alan.
No, it can't, because we owe a debt of honour to the families of those who fell and didn't come home. And Legacy has done a fantastic job. There are many prominent people in the community and in service who were Legacy wards.
And now, with this new generation of veterans who are returning from more recent conflicts, Alan, it's that work of Legacy not just focused on what happened decades ago, but now and into the future, making sure that those children, those families are supported, that they have the, everything that they need to live a successful life. And let's hope, in a way, being able to pay tribute by marching at events like this to those of their family members who may not have returned from theatres of war.
You may say about Legacy that the numbers may not be as great, but the need still is.
The Atomic Ex-Servicemen's Association, marching through now, of course they had such a huge role to play during World War II.
Yes, and also during the atomic tests in Maralinga and on the Nullarbor, we had national servicemen who were present at those tests. We're now seeing the first of the large bands. This is the Mackay North State High School Band. They have been coming to this parade for 25 years, entirely at their own expense, and that's a 1,600-mile round trip.
And it's quite a display they put on as well. I'm noticing 2 sousaphones, the trumpets, the trombones, the euphoniums, all glittering, so newly polished, ready for the Anzac Day Parade for 2019.
Yeah, the band has played at the Beijing Olympics and was invited to play at Disneyland, so it's quite a very high quality.
And I don't think this will be the last time that we see them for the parade today either.
In fact, I even notice, coming up is this one, the travelling, what would you call that?
Is that a xylophone of some description?
Yeah, it's like a xylophone, yes. But a very, very competent band.
As someone who's played in a marching band previously, I think I did more marching than playing.
And their director, Mrs. Catherine George, was awarded the OAM this year for her services to music and to the band.
A few more World War II era buggies coming down the streets in the Brisbane CBD this morning. And paying tribute to the Defence Service Nurses, the Royal Australian Army Nursing Corps Association and the Australian Army Medical Women's Service.
Yes, the Nursing Corps was formed in 1903. Australian nurses had gone to the Boer War as volunteers, about 80 of them, and out of that they formed the Royal Australian Nursing Corps, which then served at Gallipoli, served on the Western Front, and of course served in World War II and all conflicts subsequently. They walk in the footsteps of Florence Nightingale, who went to the Crimea over the total protests of the politicians to bring competent nursing to the wounded and the sick.
And potentially not always receiving the recognition they deserve for the extraordinary work that they have done.
The Wallers at the top of the army in that era, they didn't want to know about it. However, the public did, and after that, the Royal Nursing Service was formed.
The Australian Army Medical Women's Services.
Yes, you can see by that roll call, Australia, Palestine, Egypt, Lebanon, you know, they have served overseas and served well.
The Women's Royal Australian Army Corps. Now, this is a unit formed in 1951, at the time to help boost numbers post-World War II and during the Korean War. They first served overseas in Singapore. The Corps was disbanded in 1984 as female soldiers had begun to be integrated into the army at large. But then the association itself, it was formed in 1980 to stimulate interest and promote the Corps, as well as strengthen those ties of comradeship for those who have returned. And I guess the associations, whether it be with the Women's Royal Australian Army Corps, the nurses, or 6RAR Association, it's all about maintaining that friendship.
Or here we see the Women's RAF Association. Now, all these associations always welcome new members. So anyone who has served is, you know, welcome to contact them and join.
Raised in 1941 and became the largest of the World War II women's services, the WAF. Disbanded in 1947.
Yes.
It served for Australia in over 30 roles, including aircraft engineers.
As we'll see when Megan takes up the commentary for the RAF, of course, all in the Navy, Army and Air Force are now integrated into the Corps directly.
A new organisation, or when I say new, relatively so, formed in 2015 as the Women's Veterans Network for Australia. It's about connecting past and present women who have served in any of the Defence Forces with resources, support, information to, as they describe it, live an empowered and fulfilling life.
Yes, it's to reach out to those who have served and either have left or have retired to tell them what services are available.
It is the only organisation solely focused on the well-being of female veterans, very active through social media.
Yes.
As most associations are these days as well.
And then we look here and we see the Governor, and we see Wendy Taylor, a distinguished nurse, and we're talking about women veterans.
And being Anzac Day, it
Yes.
wouldn't be such without the New Zealand contingent.
Yes.
We mark it with our colleagues from across the ditch. They were there on the beaches of Gallipoli, and it is an alliance that still holds so strong today. Members of the New Zealand Armed Forces, of course, served in World War I and II, as well as the Malayan Emergency, the Korean, Vietnam War, Gulf Wars, in East Timor, Afghanistan, and again in Iraq.
They put the NZ in Anzac, and in World War II had probably the highest proportion per population of casualties.
As we transition to the Navy, leading the parade of serving personnel today, we see their band at the front of the contingent, marching proudly down the street in Brisbane, just outside of City Hall. And it's hello and welcome to Lieutenant Amanda Folkes from the Australian Navy. To help us in commentary, Amanda, for yourself, what does Anzac Day 2019 mean to you?
It's obviously, Craig, a very special day on the calendar, not just for the past and past personnel, but also current serving personnel. It's always a huge honour to come down the street and be there today and celebrate today with the rest of Australia about the sacrifices that people have made.
Who's leading the parade for the Navy?
Leading the parade today for the Navy is Commander Neil Whitehead. He's our current Deputy Shore Force Commander. And then leading HMAS Morton this morning, we have Lieutenant Gav Benham. He is the first lieutenant at HMAS Morton.
And of course, the Brisbane has such a rich role with the Navy. I think it was the Queensland Marine Defence Force was raised in 1883 to provide a local naval defence, and then that morphed into what we now know as the Australian Navy.
That's correct, yes.
We had our own gunboats, the Paluma and the Gayunda. until 1901, and then they became part of the Royal Australian Navy.
We've just seen a couple of contingent from HMAS Brisbane just come out of shot, which is, yes, the ship of our city, effectively, and just visiting its name port for the first time a couple of weeks ago. The Naval Association of Australia, formed in 1920, renamed the Naval Association of Australia in 1960, and it's the world's largest naval association with 95 branches. Then, of course, we have the Navy Women. They were formed in 1941 for service in World War II. Back then, women weren't allowed to go to sea, so they performed a number of other supporting roles onshore to free up men for sea postings, but times have definitely changed since then, Amanda, folks.
Absolutely. Women were allowed to go to sea in the early 1990s, and an interesting thing about the association now is that they've changed their name to the Navy Women's Association, previously the RANS, and that's to make sure that the people that are currently serving now feel free to join the association, even if they weren't RANS.
We're just seeing the associations of the HMAS Hobart, HMAS Perth, and HMAS Brisbane. If we talk on the Brisbane for a moment, because the ship that we just saw in port a couple of weeks ago is the third to carry HMAS Brisbane, the name. The second was launched back in 1967 in the snow of Boston as a guided missile destroyer. The first was back in 1915, but the latest is, and we're seeing that on shot right now, the Navy's newest and most advanced warship.
Absolutely. It is a fantastic looking piece of kit, I tell you that for sure. The second of our Hobart class guided missile destroyers, built here in Australia, in Adelaide. She's affectionately known as the Steel Cat. A wonderful system based on the Navantia design F-100 frigate. It's fitted with the Aegis combat system, which provides air defence for accompanying ships, land forces and infrastructure in coastal areas. Certainly the most effective and lethal platform that we've had in the Navy. State-of-the-art phased array systems, just a magnificent ship.
It certainly is. About 147 metres in length. I had the opportunity to broadcast from the helicopter landing deck at the very rear, at the stern of HMAS Brisbane. We're seeing the Royal Australian Navy Corvettes Association. Now, these ships, they were said to be as Australian as a kangaroo. They were designed by Australians who had never designed warships before, and manned by Australians who had never been to sea before. Those 56 Bathurst class ships were built in Australia, some of which were built here at Kangaroo Point in Brisbane by Evans Deakin. They built 11 of those ships.
Well, if you saw the film The Cruel Sea, you would have seen what a job the corvettes did.
The Fleet Air Arm Association of Australia. It was formed in 1948 to serve on aircraft carriers Vengeance, the Sydney and the Melbourne. Naval planes ceased in 1982 when the Melbourne was decommissioned. Served in Korea, Malayan Emergency, Vietnam. Now the Fleet Air Arm, Amanda, instead of planes, would be helicopter base.
Absolutely, yes. We currently have two large ships, the Adelaide and the Canberra, which can carry multiple helicopters at one particular time. And of course, also exciting times for the Navy as we introduced our newest squadron, 822X Squadron, which is our unmanned aircraft system.
Technology changing the role of the Defence Force in 2019 and beyond. The Vendetta Veterans Association are marching down Adelaide Street now. They served in both World War I and II. Commissioned back in 1917, the Vendetta first saw action at Kattegat, engaging German minesweepers when on patrol. And then operating in the Baltic the following year, she rescued 430 of the total crew of 470 when HMAS Cassandra struck a mine and sank. We're seeing the Submariners Association of Australia Queensland branch here, and that's the collective name of the submarine element of the Royal Australian Navy. The service currently forms the Navy's Submarine Force Element Group and consists of, well, these days, 6 Collins-class submarines.
That's correct, yes.
But recently announced they will be exchanged, or new submarines are in the works.
Yeah, so after 2030, Navy's expecting a new class of submarine. Recently, at the end of last year, was announced the Attack class submarine being built here in Australia as well.
Now, the Queensland branch has only one surviving World War II member. That is John Beams, who's too frail to join his fellow submariners today, but would be watching at home. And I just want to tell you a little bit about John's story. At 17, he entered the Royal Navy. That was in 1943 as an ordinary seaman. By 1945, he was the second commanding officer of an X-craft, one of those midget submarines designed to sink Japanese shipping and damage the underwater telegraph cables that were quite vital to Japanese signal security. And John was part of the X-craft submarines that combined caused massive damage to the Japanese war effort. Extraordinary results by such a small team it was. So to John Beams, hello to you, sir. We salute your effort and pay tribute to your fallen comrades as well.
Isn't that a beautiful shot?
I think we're so lucky, Alan, to have a tree-lined street like this.
Yes.
A glorious day overhead, blue skies, a couple of clouds, perfect conditions for the crowds that you see lining the street to be out to pay their respects on this Anzac Day in 2019. If you're just joining our coverage on ABC TV, my name's Craig Zonka, Alan Callaghan from the National Servicemen's Association, and Lieutenant Amanda Folkes from the Royal Australian Navy with you. You see the dais with the Governor, Paul de Jersey, and the Chairman of the Queensland Anzac Day Parade Committee, Wendy Taylor.
This parade epitomises the Australian attitude. We don't believe in pomp and glory. We believe in paying respectful, quiet tribute to all those who've served and remembering those who died.
We're seeing the Royal Australian Naval Communications Branch Association here. They were formed shortly after World War II, with members serving in World War II, Korea, Vietnam as well, and then on various peacekeeping missions as well.
I see also that the first successful ship-to-shore wireless transmission was between the Guyanda, which I mentioned before, the Queensland gunboat, and a receiving station on the cliffs near St Mary's Anglican Church in Brisbane.
Now the Clearance Divers Association, led by Peter Tedman.
Yes. Former commanding officer of HMAS Morton.
And he led the first clearance diving contingent, I think it was to East Timor, wasn't it?
That's correct, yes. A very distinguished officer.
Amanda, would they have been involved in when a mine washed up on the shore at Surfers Paradise and they had to delouse it was live from World War II? Would they be the unit that did it?
There's quite potentially that would have been the case. That is their core role. One of their core roles is to undertake those sort of operations.
And they did it successfully because surfers are still there.
Absolutely.
Oh, and they were also had a critical role to play after the floods that we saw in Brisbane a couple of years ago. They were instrumental in effectively reopening Moreton Bay.
That's correct. And they're going to be holding their reunion later on this year in September, and it'll be the first time that the majority of that association comes back in together on numbers in mass back in Brisbane since those 2011 floods.
And to think they began as hard hat divers pre-1920. It wasn't until the 1950s that the clearance diving branch was formed, and its primary role being that location, identification and disposal of mines underwater.
These are incapacitated veterans being transported again by historic taxis.
And we see the Far East Strategic Reserve Association. It comprised of the Royal Navy, Royal New Zealand, and the Royal Australian Navy destroyers Voyager, frigates and minesweepers D31 and DO4, based in Singapore in the 1950s to deter the spread of communism. Many of the Navy Nashos, in fact, served there.
Yes, they did, yes. They never got to Korea, but they did get to nearly all the theatres of operation, the National Servicemen, in the 50s and in the 1950s, yes.
Yeah, the Malayan Emergency, Indonesian Confrontation. Some units also served in the Vietnam War. We see the Vietnam Logistics Support Veterans Association of HMAS Sydney.
Yes, my brother served on that, on the run between Sydney and Vung Tau.
And Craig and Alan, we mentioned earlier on HMAS Brisbane. We are receiving a new HMAS Sydney early in 2020, the third of our Hobart-class destroyers.
Also a sister ship for the Brisbane.
Absolutely.
And as I understand it, the association also includes civilians who are sent to entertain the troops, such as little Patty.
Yes, in fact, when the Battle of Long Tan erupted, she was the one that was singing, and they had to evacuate her and the band off the stage.
the Tingira Australia Association. Now, this association's function is to keep the spirit of the junior recruits at the training bases of HMAS Cerebus and HMAS Leeuwin alive through reuniting classes and shipmates.
Yes, because Cerberus is in Victoria and Leeuwin is in Western Australia, so they covered the nation. And then we have the Company of Master Mariners, most important because they were the people who captained the ships.
And the Company of Master Mariners of Australia, celebrating 80 years since formation in 2019, operated in all seas, all oceans, to all supply areas. Founded in Brisbane, in fact, the company in 1939 by Captain N. Bolton. So members include harbour masters, ship pilots, stevedores, administrators and marine surveyors.
And as I said, during World War II, German and Japanese submarines operated around Australia and sank some 100 ships.
Amanda, folks, thanks so much for joining us in commentary today as we've seen the Navy contingent pass through. All the best for the rest of your Anzac Day 2019.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
And as Amanda leaves us, I'm just looking down Adelaide Street and it's turned into a sea of green, you might say, Alan.
Well, now we're reaching the regular army, yes.
Brisbane is, of course, home for the Army's 7th Brigade, based at Gallipoli Barracks at Enoggera. Around about 1,500 of Army colleagues will be marching today on this Anzac Day 2019. Led by the Army Band, of course.
Well, World War II taught us to have as many of our forces as forward as we could.
And I'm pleased to say we're joined by Major Richard Thapthing from the 7th Brigade headquarters.
Good morning, Craig. Good morning, Alan. How are you?
Good morning.
On this Anzac Day, just tell us who's leading the Army contingent.
So this morning we've got the Army contingent is being led by the commander of the 7th Brigade, Brigadier Andrew Hocking, and he's supported by his Regimental Sergeant Major, Warrant Officer Class 1, Tony Kennedy. The 7th Brigade has been exceptionally busy this year. It's been a very busy time as the ready brigade for the Army, for the ADF. And we've got men and women deployed in absolutely every region of the world at the moment. And so proud that Brisbane's Brigade is able again to be marching here on Anzac Day 2019.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about where some of the troops are currently deployed. We see the Queensland Mounted Infantry just move through, the emu plumes in their hat. And then, of course, leading the 2nd 14th Light Horse Regiment, which can trace its origins back to 1860 and is regarded as Queensland's oldest unit. Quite incredible history here, Richard. 2nd
14th Light Horse Regiment, Queensland Mounted Infantry have a very long history, a very proud history. I noticed you guys spoke about the emu plumes before. 2nd 14th, are a modern mechanised armoured unit. They operate the M1A1 Abrams tank and also the ASLAV. They are currently quite small on parade because they are currently prepared for their deployment into Iraq very soon as part of Taji Task Force Rotation 9. So very busy unit at the moment, very strong, proud histories that 2nd 14th can trace right back to the beginning of the Australian Army.
And is this the unit that will be the first to drive these new vehicles known as the Boxer?
That's right, 2nd 14th will be the first unit that will get the brand new Boxer as part of our Land 400. This vehicle will absolutely revolutionise the battlefield as we see it today. A modern vehicle for modern times, and it's going to take us into the future, ready for any conflict that we may have in the future.
And being constructed just outside of Brisbane at a facility that's been built at Ipswich.
Absolutely. Look, I think much like the Bushmaster, the little Aussie success story, I think we're going to have the same with Rheinmetall and their Boxer.
If you've got a leftover ASLAB, can I have one for the peak hour?
Alan, I'm going to write that in my notes. One ASLAB for Alan. Done.
The 1st Regiment of the Royal Australian Artillery coming into shot now. First raised in Sydney at North Head Barracks. This year marks the unit's 70th year of service. It's known as a digitised Field Artillery Regiment. Right. What does that actually mean, Richard?
So the 1st Regiment, they operate our big guns, our M777 howitzers on the battlefield. These things are incredibly impressive. They fire a round that's 155 millimetres in size, and they can shoot that thing out to sometimes 30 kilometres if the situation is right. So the men and women of the 1st Regiment, they're unbelievable at being able to use these big guns, but also coordinate those giant rounds with pinpoint accuracy. It's amazing what they can do.
And this is the 2nd Combat Engineer Regiment with a few dogs in tow.
That's right. So in front of you, you have Chaz and Dexter. You also have Willis and Henry. Now, these are explosive detection dogs. They're not just pets. They are dogs that are highly trained and specialised to assist the engineers in finding those improvised or deliberate explosive devices. We saw these EDDs, we call them, in action during the Commonwealth Games last year on the Gold Coast. And you could see behind the EDDs is a little terrier called Driver. Driver is the mascot of the 2nd Combat Engineer Regiment, and by far the cutest dog I think I've ever seen in my life.
Can I just mention, you were saying about the pinpoint accuracy of the artillery. It was the artillery that saved D Company at Long Tan, of course.
Yeah.
It was a New Zealand unit, but pinpoint accuracy. Without that, D Company would have been annihilated.
That's so true, Alan. You know, there's an old saying that the infantry is the queen of the battlefield. Well, they also say that it's very supported by artillery that's the king of the battlefield. So it's a mutual relationship. One could not exist without the other in our history, in our current and in the future wars.
We'll talk about some of the units that you've served with in a moment, Richard, but you're a dad with young children as well. How do you explain the Anzac legacy to them?
It's quite easy to explain to them because it's about being part of something that's bigger than themselves and bigger than just the family. It's about being part of this institution that is so key to Australia and you know, us as Australians. You know, I look around today and I see the majority of people here are civilians who have come out to show their support for the servicemen and women, sacrifices of the past and sacrifices that we make every day. So explaining that to the children is an incredibly easy task. They're very proud to be part of the Anzac tradition.
Those qualities of mateship, endurance, courage, sacrifice. We're looking at the St. Peter's Lutheran College Band.
While we're doing that, could I have your permission to give a wave to Alan May, who was the forward scout at Long Tan and is in hospital.
Behind the band is the 7th Combat Signal Regiment. Now provides communication support predominantly, doesn't it, Richard?
That's right. So 7 CSR are our communications experts. They maintain our sort of communications in the battlefield. You know, we rely on command and control. Well, without communications, you can't have command and control. So we call it C3 in this modern era. The ability of these young men and women with their understanding of communications to interlink the battlefield, satellite communications, radio communications, HF, VHF, it's incredibly complex and we heavily rely on these individuals. At the moment, they've got quite a large number of people deployed into the Middle East and they're providing, again, the strategic communications for the men and women of our armed services currently deployed.
And this is the 6th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment, an infantry battalion of the Australian Army, originally raised here in Brisbane on the 6th of June back in 1965. It has served in a number of overseas deployments, including South Vietnam, Timor-Leste, Iraq and Afghanistan. You've served with 6RAR, Richard?
I have. I was fortunate enough to be a young lieutenant in the 6th Battalion, 11 years ago now, deployed with them twice. I come back to Brisbane's brigade, and 6RAR, new faces, same role, heavily relied upon, heavily deployed. They've just finished their deployment on Taji 7, which was a deployment to Iraq, and they still have men and women deployed to this day over into the Middle East supporting it. They're a very busy organisation, and their focus when they're not deployed is being a mechanized brigade. So they're a combat infantry brigade, but they operate out of armoured vehicles. In this day and age, that's the M113 APC, Armoured Personnel Carriers.
And of course 6RAR, highly decorated. Members of D Company participated in the Battle of Long Tan back in 1966. They also have VC recipients among their ranks as well. The 8th 9th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment. This is regarded as Brisbane's own battalion.
Brisbane's own battalion indeed. 8-9 RAR, led by their mascot Stan the Ram. Hopefully we get to see Stan the Ram today. 8-9 RAR is a motorised battalion. When you see a Bushmaster that's out and about in Brisbane, it's most likely from the 8th 9th Battalion. They've been very busy, as we have been the Ready Brigade. They're supporting deployments currently happening in the Philippines, and they currently have a whole company of soldiers deployed in Malaysia at this point in time. So very busy, a high readiness, very sort of sharp and acute infantry battalion that's ready for anything that the world may throw at it. We should be very proud of the men and women of this battalion and how they stand by ready to support anything that we ask of them.
Granted freedom to the city in 1992 by the 8th 9th. This is the 7th Combat Service Support Battalion. This has a few subunits as well, including transport squadrons, a field supply company, field workshop company as well, so quite a varied role.
They do. The 7 CSSB, or 7 CISB as we call them, are our logisticians on the battlefield and in the barracks as well. Often don't get the limelight, but it's quite obvious that without the logisticians that support our workshops, fix our vehicles, supply us the food, water, ammunition, and transport us around the battlefield, you can't do anything on the battlefield. So the importance of these logisticians, often ignored, but they cannot be in this modern day and age. They're as important as they always have been. Now you'll see in front of us now, this is the pipes and drums of the 8th 9th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment. What I find most impressive about the pipes and drums is that these individuals are not pipers, not drummers. They're soldiers who have taken up pipes and drums as a pastime as well. Good enough to do on parade today. They should be very proud.
Kept very busy by the sound of things.
Kept extremely busy.
Could I point out that when I went to Anzac Day Parade with my father, they were mostly veterans with campaign medals, but you could see them from 18 to 45. Now you're seeing them mostly younger, in their 20s and 30s, and they include women, but they also have active service medals. That's the big change we're seeing in this parade.
Yeah.
And who do we have in front of us at the moment, Richard?
So this is the 7th Combat Support Battalion, Combat Service Support Battalion, led by the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Cole Lingo, and the Regimental Sergeant Major, Warrant Officer Virginia Morris. So the really interesting thing about 7 CISB is they have just taken up the brand new logistical vehicles in the Army called Land 121 vehicles. These things are ginormous. They're huge vehicles, but they've absolutely changed the face of how logistics is now managed. It's no longer just pulling up a truck, getting everything off the truck, and then your stuff is delivered. These things are so technologically advanced, and they're becoming experts, not only in logistics, but in just basic soldiering. They focus on this thing called shoot, move, and communicate. And I can tell you right now, the modern day logistician is as able as the modern day soldier anywhere they go. They're a force to be reckoned with, absolutely.
And this is the 2nd General Health Battalion.
That's right.
The history of this battalion goes back to the landing at Gallipoli. They were in charge of the 1st Australian Casualty Clearing Station. A role that still exists now and have been in all theatres of war since.
The importance of having our medical staff deployed with us, you can't be overestimated. Led by Lieutenant Colonel Paul Manuel and the RSM Warrant Officer Class 1 Neil Atkins, the 2 GHB are our deployable hospital. So we have one. Now, it's really hard to fathom this. If you just imagine a footy field with nothing there. Now, everyone has been to a hospital. You've seen how complex hospitals are. These men and women will make a hospital on that footy field from nothing. The complexities, the intelligence, the speciality to make that happen is beyond me, and it's incredibly impressive. They should be rightly proud of the service that they provide to this country.
And this is all based here in Brisbane, Gallipoli Barracks at Enoggera, this large contingent of the armed services that we have, and whether that be the Navy at HMAS Moreton, the RAF at Amberley, we are a proud, in many ways, garrison city.
We are very much a garrison city. We are a large city. The barracks for the Army is right in the middle of it, but I can tell you we are so proud to be a part of Brisbane, being Brisbane's brigade. Now, again, I walk the streets and you can sort of see, if you zoom in on these soldiers, I can relate when you march down these streets, when you march down Adelaide Street up to the dais, the hardest thing to do is to wipe that smile off your face, because you just feel the energy from the crowd. You feel the energy from everyone there. The little kids waving their flag, reaching out for a high five. It's second to none, the feeling that we get. And really, that's what Anzac Day is all about. It's the community coming together and supporting the men and women of the armed services. There's nothing better.
And the deployments that we're seeing at the moment, how long are they for?
The deployments themselves vary between sort of 6 to 8 months in duration, but the thing about a modern day deployment is the actual going overseas in some ways is almost the easy part. If it's a 6-month deployment, you're looking at almost 6 months worth of training just to get to overseas. So for the men and women that deploy, but most importantly for the families that are left home, it's a year-long journey that they're losing their loved ones on exercises, on training. Before then, they lose them overseas, which they can only speak to them every now and then. So it is very much a sacrifice that not only the men and women that go make, but also the families and the Brisbane community for these deployments.
The Brisbane Boys College Band coming down Adelaide Street for the 2019 Anzac Day Parade. And now it's the associations of the Army, the 1st Armoured Regiment Association.
1st Armoured Regiment, currently still in existence today, based out of Adelaide. They, much like 2nd 14th, are an armoured cavalry regiment that operate the M1A1 Abrams tank. That thing weighs 70 tonnes. It's a 70 tonnes. It's a very, very heavy vehicle. The
3rd Cavalry Regiment Association served in Vietnam from 65 through until 72. It was part of the first units to establish the task force at Nui Dat and the last to leave in 72. The versatility of the armoured personnel carrier allowed the regiment to operate in dual roles, one as cavalry and the other as transport and support for the infantry. But very extensive operations throughout Vietnam. And this is the St Andrews Pipe Band. Oh no, there's no pipes in that band.
And what we can see ahead of us is another unit that served in every war, the Salvation Army. There was nowhere that they weren't.
Well, that is the Salvation Army Band. Now that we've just zoomed in on the hats, we can find out a little bit more about the Salvation Army Band. Followed by the 2nd 14th Light Horse Regiment and Queensland Mounted Infantry Association. We were talking about the great history associated with this unit. Saw active service from the Boer War through to Afghanistan and now preparing for further deployments to Iraq.
They're a very busy unit and they continue to be busy to this day, absolutely.
Just reverting to the Salvation Army Band for a moment, the joke is that General Booth has commented as saying is, why should the devil have all the best tunes? So he formed the bands.
And here we have the Royal Regiment of the Australian Artillery Associations. This takes through the 101st Field Battery Association, which served in 2 tours of duty in South Vietnam, the first in 66 into 67, the second leading into 1970. And although the battery had been part of the 4th Field Regiment in Malaysia earlier in the 60s, its parent unit during both of its tours of Vietnam was the 1st Field Regiment.
You know, Craig, these gunners, when I see them in the field operating their guns, now, you know, when I was younger, I saw them operate their 105s, and now I see them operate the M777. It's such a specialised and a highly trained team to operate this one gun that fires at such an incredible rate per minute. I equate it to an F1 Formula Pit team. That everyone has their role, everyone works in unison, and it's almost like clockwork. If you ever want to see something, I would suggest YouTubing an M777 team and watching them firing. It's an amazing piece of teamwork and really shows that teamwork, which is one of our Army values. You know, when you put together a team, it can't be defeated. And
that's what we're celebrating today and commemorating that work of teams, whether it be from the World Wars, the theatre of wars that we've been involved with, through to the work back at home of the Australian military, the 105th Field Battery Association coming through now. Raised in 1916 in Egypt for World War I, the battery served with distinction for the next 3 years, from Passchendaele in Belgium to Amiens and Villers-Bretonneux in France, and concluded its time in Belgium after the armistice. The unit was disbanded on the 30th of March 1919, but then re-raised in the 1920s, based at Kelvin Grove for a while. Then disbanded in 1940 and reformed in 1955, in fact, to set sail for Malaya. The 108th Field Battery Association for the Royal Australian Artillery. It was originally raised in 1916, saw service in France during World War I. Disbanded in 1919, was reformed as a CMF unit in 1921. The current 108th Field Battery was raised in 1965 and saw service in Vietnam. Has also served in Singapore, East Timor, Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yes, the cannon was invented in the 13th century and immediately made forts obsolete because they just battered them down. Changed warfare forever.
The Locating, Surveillance and Target Acquisition Association, known as the eyes and ears, you might say, of the battlefield.
That's right. So the modern day unit is the 20th Surveillance Target Acquisition Regiment, based here in Gallipoli Barracks and in Nogra here in Brisbane. They fly the larger UAVs, so the ones that sort of fly like planes. You can't really see them from the ground, and they are definitely our eyes and ears. You know, to be able to manoeuvre with artillery, the infantry, the tanks, and put together their complex combined arms, well, you need to know where the bad guys are. So the 20 STA are the eyes and ears. They provide us what we call ISR, Information Surveillance and Reconnaissance, and they point us in the direction of where we need to be manoeuvring. They're a very highly capable unit.
So they've taken over, the drones have taken over from the radar, field radar and the aerials, have they?
The drones have added an extra layer on top of that, Alan. Yeah, so it's as the battlefield and technology is becoming more and more complex, things don't become obsolete, in my opinion. We just add more and more layers that we need to master on top.
Well, drones can get shot down.
That's exactly right.
Behind the Major Stuart Brown Memorial Band is the Air Defence Queensland Association. Members of the association, which was formed in '87, have served in World War II in Borneo, South Vietnam, Cambodia, Timor-Leste, Kuwait, Iraq and Afghanistan.
So we call them the bird gunners, the air defence crew, are currently now called 16 Air Land Regiment and based out of Adelaide down there in South Australia. Operate very highly precision air defence missiles. And again, you know, we live in a modern battlefield where it's not just who's in front of you, behind you, next to you, it's who's above you as well. And these guys and girls are the ones that look up and keep us protected from the skies.
This is the Royal Australian Artillery Association, representing active and former members of the Defence Force, both regular and reserve, who have served in artillery units. The association formed in 1993 and has a gun display at Fort Lytton National Park as well. Served in theatres of war from the Boer War, World War I, World War II, Malaya, Borneo, Vietnam, UN Peacekeepers as well.
Of course, Queensland had its own armed forces until 1859. Till 1901. And that included its own guns, cannon and guns.
Now we see the Sapper Association for Queensland and follow the Sapper. That's a pretty common term you'd hear, Richard.
Follow the Sapper is an absolute common term that I use often. In Afghanistan, you know, I walked hundreds of thousands of kilometres and always I had in front of me 1 to 2 sappers with their mine labs out that were just keeping us safe, sometimes with their explosive section dogs as well. I've got the utmost respect for the young men and women that are sappers nowadays and the job they do. You know, not only in deployments currently, but when we talk about what they do as part of the battlefield, the sapper or the engineer, you know, they provide mobility, which allows us to manoeuvre, or counter mobility, which stops the enemy from manoeuvring. So sappers are like the infantry, but they have to do a whole bunch more as well.
We're just seeing members of the 17th Construction Squadron Association, who manufactured and repaired the squadron's equipment, shares the squadron's Blue Bear logo and motto, apparently, a little bear to fix it. Taken from an old ad you might remember, Alan.
Yes, an old bear, I think it was bear tape. Little bear will fix it, yes.
The nickname, the unit was nicknamed the Moonmen for their ability to clear sand dunes to fit roads and buildings as well. The modern day unit moved to Enoggera just a couple of years ago. This is the 2019 Anzac Day Parade, live on ABC TV, streaming as well through Facebook on ABC Brisbane. And this is the St Joseph's College Band.
Could I just mention my father was a sapper. He was in the 5th Bomb Disposal Platoon, which you had to volunteer for, and served 2 tours of duty in New Guinea and the islands, and was in the landing at Labuan in Borneo. Wow. When he stepped ashore, it was in Callaghan Avenue. So no relation.
And behind the sousaphones, with terrace emblazoned on them, for St Joseph's Gregory Terrace, is the Australian Water Transport Association, which began in World War II as Royal Australian Engineers Small Crafts Companies. In '73 it transferred from the Engineering Corps to the Corps of Transport, served in post-World War II conflicts, particularly in Vietnam.
We had national servicemen in this unit.
In the modern era, you know, the Australian Army has been focused a lot more on amphibious operations. So our ability to get soldiers, equipment and supplies from the ship to the shore has had an increased importance on Australian water transport. So now based out of 9 FSB up in Townsville, these men and women that operate those boats that get us between those big ships onto the shore, extremely important for what we need to be doing.
The Royal Australian Survey Corps Association, formed on the 1st of July back in 1915, was granted its royal status in 1948 for services rendered during World War II.
You had to know where you were and they provided the maps.
That's right.
The mapping task, absolutely. From the end of World War II until the end of the 70s, in fact, the unit provided full mapping coverage as a gift to the PNG nation on reaching full independence as well.
Well, and the service still exists today. We have our geospatial men and women that work as part of our intelligence corps now, and they do the exact same thing. I've got the young soldiers that assist me with the mapping, and in this day and age with technology, some of the maps they can put together is out of control.
The Royal Australian Signals Association. The association itself was formed in 1977 at Victoria Barracks, just up the road from where we are today in Petrie Terrace. The motto for the group has been Swift and Sure. And the colours and badge show Mercury, the winged messenger of the gods, has served in all conflicts, including UN peacekeeping operations. And we see the commandos just coming into view as well down Adelaide Street in Brisbane, representing some of our most elite soldiers, you could say.
That's right. So the Australian Commando Association, representing 2 Commando, which is currently based out of Sydney, and also 1 Commando, the reserve element that supports them as well. The Special Forces community are the elite of the ADF. They go deep into the enemy territory. They support us through their unconventional operations for us to do our conventional operations. An incredible part of how we keep ourselves safe on the battlefield and when we go abroad as well.
The 1st Commando Unit, the first independent commando company, was formed in World War II to serve in the Middle East, but were moved to the Pacific Theatre due to the increased threat, as you can imagine, posed by Japanese forces at the time. Several more commando squadrons were raised over the duration of World War II, including the well-renowned Z Special Unit and N Special Unit. For services in Afghanistan, the regiment was collectively awarded the Unit Citation for Gallantry and the Meritorious Unit Citation. The 2nd Commando Regiment has also been awarded Battle Honours for its role in the Battle of Eastern Shawali Kot. While many of the regiment's personnel are highly decorated, Cameron Baird was Australia's first commando to be awarded the Victoria Cross. He was awarded for his gallantry during a battle in which he was killed when his unit engaged with insurgents in Uruzgan province in Afghanistan in June of 2013. This is the Royal Australian Regiment Association, representing all Royal Australian Regiment battalions, sub-unit members and their families. This gentleman to salute the Governor, as you see, wearing his medals proudly on his chest, stepping out of his wheelchair to do so. That is what Anzac Day means.
It's amazing to see the sacrifice, not only of the past, but these veterans who are getting older, and you can see it takes them a lot of effort to come out here and do this, but they are just energised by their experience, by what's around them, by the people, and it is so heart-moving to see.
4 RAR Association moving through down Adelaide Street now. First battalion to be raised locally in South Australia back in 1964. Be careful of that walking stick.
Yes, I was going to say, I hope it's not loaded. I was going to mention the Governor, of course, also has served. He was a lieutenant in the Queensland University Regiment.
This is the 5th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment Association, 5 RAR.
5 RAR still going strong today, currently based up in Darwin. They, much like 8-9 RAR, are the motorised battalion for the 1st Combat Brigade up in Darwin.
Mascot, as you can see, displayed proudly on their banner is the tiger.
It is.
Understand that occasionally they borrow one from Taronga Park Zoo.
That's right. I think it'd be quite difficult to keep a tiger in the barracks. That'd probably be a full-time job, I'd say.
Wouldn't it ever? And 6 RAR now coming down Adelaide Street. raised in Enoggera in 1965, sent to Singapore early in the 70s, before then on to the Vietnam War, and well known, the Delta Company, for its role in the Battle of Long Tan.
You feel the connection that 6RR has with its history, and in fact every unit has with their history, and obviously I can only talk about the 6 battalions because of my experiences. When I came back as a young platoon commander with my platoon from Iraq, we had our infantry combat badges presented to us by the veterans of Long Tan, and I can tell you it was an incredibly humbling experience to have these men that we've read about and that we've studied and that we looked up to present us with the same badges that they were presented with after their Battle of the Long Tan, the infantry combat badge. And that is just one example of every regiment and every unit in the Australian Army still maintaining that links with its history, because without the history, you know, the unit is really nothing. It's just there by itself. So past, present and future, the history is strong.
And that's it, knowing that future generations are carrying that with them, wherever they may be deployed around the world or serving here in Australia.
Yeah, I mentioned Alan May before, who was the forward scout. He also fired the first shot at the Battle of Long Tan. He saw 3 people he thought were children eating, and then he saw a radio aerial. So he knew it was the Viet Cong, and that set the whole battle off.
Yeah.
And of course, Corporal Daniel Kieran from 6RAR was awarded the Victoria Cross for his gallantry in battle in Deripat. Other soldiers awarded for their actions in this battle from 6RAR include Lieutenant James Fanning, Sergeant Sean Lanigan and Private Paul Langer, along with Private Sean Parker. But of course, 6RAR also paid a heavy price, losing a number of soldiers during battle in Afghanistan. The 7th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment, it was formed in Puckapunyal in Victoria back in 1965 as part of the Australian Army's build-up for the Vietnam War. The battalion subsequently served twice in South Vietnam.
It's well to remember that no Army unit escaped unscathed from deaths and casualties in Vietnam. You know that it was dangerous service.
Approximately 2,500 men served with the 7th Battalion. Of these, and you talk of those losses, Alan, 33 were killed. Another 220 were recorded as being wounded for their actions in Vietnam. This is the 8th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment. It was formed in 1966, again as part of that expansion of the Australian Army to the threat of communism, sent to Malaysia in 67, then on to South Vietnam. And then it was later on that the 8th and 9th combined for what we now see based at Enoggera Barracks.
That's right. You know, I look at the banners and I can see 8 RAR Brisbane Zone, which is what 8 9 RAR have taken, and then I look at the 9 Battalion banner and I see Stand the Ram as their emblem. So 8 9 RAR representing both the history of both 8 RAR and also 9 RAR as well.
We'll see the 9th Battalion Association in just a moment. This is the 2nd 26th Infantry Battalion Association. Raised in 1941 for battle in Malaya.
The 9th Battalion was originally the Moreton Regiment, wasn't it?
I'm not too sure, Alan.
Yeah, when I did national service, it was the 41st Battalion, the Byron Scottish, and then I came to Brisbane and it was the 9th Battalion, the Moreton Regiment.
And here we have the 9th Battalion coming into view, with veterans removing their hats, ready to turn to the dais. And this is the Royal Australian Regiment, the 2nd 4th Battalion Association. The association itself formed in 2013, but the battalion was formed post-Vietnam by amalgamating the 2nd and 4th battalions. That was in 1973. Based in Townsville, the battalion saw overseas deployments to Rifle Company Butterworth in Malaysia from 73 to 89, and has also been awarded for its work with the United Nations Assistance Mission in Rwanda back in the mid-90s. So you have the separate 8 RAR, 9 RAR associations, and now the 8th, 9th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment Association. It was first formed, the Amalgamated Battalion, on the 31st of October in 1973.
And we start to see the spread of operations into the Middle East, into Afghanistan, and also peacekeeping that in Africa,
Of course.
Somalia and other troubled spots.
The battalion remained in existence until 97 when it was removed from the order of battle, but then the government re-raised the battalion in 2007 for ready reserve commitments, but later upgraded to full-time service, ready for operational deployments, which it has been involved with more recently.
Maybe they said just make it 8 battalion brackets 2. You know,
I tell you, it seems fairly straightforward to us. There's an 8th battalion, a 9th battalion, and then there's an 8th, 9th battalion. But I can tell you, for the men and women of those battalions, it is very important. It is very important.
Exactly right. Well, like you say, it's all about the history and the tradition of who you represent.
Every infantry battalion that you go to has its own culture, has its own history, has its own background, it has its own sense and feeling, and you sense that and you get that as you're a part of it. You can go from one battalion to another, and for me, I feel like my original battalion at 6RA, it still feels like home for me. Even though I've served in many battalions since then.
It's that comfy pair of shoes.
It really is that comfy pair of shoes. So it is a bit hard with the naming convention sometimes, but it means a lot to people, and it is service to the nation, service to this unit that is above yourself.
And in speaking of that, we see the 5th, 7th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment Association, raised in 73 as well by, again, amalgamating the 5th and 7th Battalions. I served in Malaysia, Rhodesia, after Cyclone Tracy in Darwin, Cambodia, Rwanda, East Timor, the Solomons, Iraq and Afghanistan.
That's a very interesting spread, isn't it, of service?
Oh.
But it's not the numbers that matter, it's the courage.
No, that's right.
The 1st Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment Association, raised from the 65th Infantry Battalion at the end of World War II. It's currently based in Townsville, known as 1 RAR, or apparently the Big Blue One, I'm told.
The Big Blue One. You know when 1 RAR are around. I can tell you that at any sporting competition or any parade I've been to, 1 RAR lets you know that they're there. A great organisation with such a strong history. The Big Blue One. You can always rely on the Big Blue One to do whatever you need.
You certainly can. Sir Peter Cosgrove, a former commanding officer of 1 RAR as well. Many battle honours associated if you read through the list. This is the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment Association, another of your former units, Richard.
2 RAR is a unit that's very near and dear to my heart. I was a captain there, and then I went on to be a company commander there as well as the operations officer. 2 RAR in this modern context are our amphibious specialists. They are focusing on amphibious operations from Navy vessels, and especially the highly trained aspects of pre-landing force operations is what 2 RAR's current role is. Highly trained, highly capable men and women up there in Townsville.
So through a number of theatres of war, Japan, Korea, Malaya, Vietnam, East Timor, and currently deployed as well?
Currently deployed, supporting all of the deployments that we have at the moment.
And there we have the ubiquitous Blitzwagen. Served in every war, that one.
Have you spent time in the back of one of those, Alan?
Oh yes, very uncomfortable from here to Tin Can Bay range.
It does not
in
look
one of those, yes, very hard.
You would feel every single bump on your
Yes,
backside.
you would, yes. That and the other vehicles we'll see later. But they'd go anywhere.
Now for the SES Association. First formed in Australia in 1957, though its origins were established during World War II. The Special Air Service unit was expanded to a regiment in the 60s, and taking on that name of SAS, the regiment first saw operational service in Borneo in 1965 and then on to Vietnam.
Looking at them, those and they and the commandos, they're all much the same height. There's no, seriously, I was looking especially at that. There are no very tall servicemen in it. They all seem to be fairly uniform size.
And
maybe that's a characteristic or
a very elite unit, obviously.
Yeah.
Still
Yeah.
a Tier 1 Special Forces unit, a major component of Australia's Special Operations Task Group, charged with conducting long, quite hazardous small team operations that need an extremely high level skill set, often in remote areas and with little tactical level support either.
The next one is my old unit, the 9th Battalion, the Morton Regiment.
Yeah, coming in behind Sunnybank Brass.
Yes.
Sunnybank Brass actually won the march contest at the Australian National Band Championships over the Easter weekend, which were held just here in Brisbane. First ashore, the motto for the 9th Battalion Association.
You notice they say battalions, plural?
Yeah, I just was going to pick up on that. So this is for, what, any battalion with a 9 in its title?
No, I think it's because, say, in my day, it was the Morton Regiment. It's only later on, I think, they adopted the straight 9. They had quite a distinguished war record, too.
And Major Richard Thapthing, as we look at the Army associations, you've spoken about that history previously, but I just want to mention there is a fantastic Anzac exhibit at the Queensland Museum right now.
There is, yeah.
Which features one of your family.
It does feature my beautiful wife, Erin, got an interview as part of this exhibit, and she speaks about the Anzac tradition, and she speaks about how we as volunteer members, we choose to be a part of this Anzac tradition and sacrifice, and in fact the partners in some way choose to be a part of this as well. But it's the children of the serving men and women who don't get a choice in the matter, and they're born into this Anzac spirit. It's a very short snippet as part of this exhibit, but I tell you, it's incredibly heart-wrenching and incredibly, hits home that Anzac Day, the Anzac tradition, and what the Anzac future is going to be is much more than just the services. It's about us as a nation.
This is the 49th Battalion Association. Formed in Egypt originally, the 49th Battalion in 1915, then moved on to France and Flanders as part of the 13th Brigade of the 4th Division, taking over 2,000 casualties. Members of the 49th fought in all major areas, including Passchendaele, Pozières, Villers-Bretonneux and Amiens. The troops were finally repatriated from World War I in mid-1919. But then in World War II, the 49th was the first to travel to PNG. After a number of bloody battles, it was disbanded in 1943. Now the New Guinea Volunteer Rifles Association, along with the Papua New Guinea Volunteer Rifles. This is an army militia unit formed in Rabaul in 1939 with about 500 officers and men. Members conducted behind-the-line activities as a coast watcher and also carrying out patrols, as well as providing local knowledge and support of other allied units. The unit at one stage was referred to as the Keepers of the Gate into mainland New Guinea until the arrival of regular Australian and allied units. Also earned the nickname the Gallant 500.
Well, during the National Service era, you could choose to do your National Service either in Brisbane at Wakefield or in the PNGVR if you were from New Guinea.
And interestingly, both units, the PNGVR and the NGVR, were formed, served and disbanded without actually ever setting foot on Australian soil.
Yes. Yeah.
This is the Papua New Guinea Infantry Battalion, the New Guinea Infantry Battalion and the Pacific Islands Regiment. And this year marks the 79th anniversary of the formation of the PIB back in June of 1940. Fought in many spheres in PNG, including on the Kokoda Track. Many were the all but forgotten barefoot Papua and New Guinean soldiers who fought alongside the Australian troops to help overthrow the Japanese invaders from New Guinea.
There is another unit too that Australians don't know much about, and that was the Torres Strait Island Battalion. 1,000 men who were formed in 1942 and actually served in what was then Dutch New Guinea. Lost 36 killed.
This is the 39th Battalion Association. The unit first served on the Western Front during World War I. It was again reformed during World War II when the battalion was sent to New Guinea. Soldiers of the 39th were heavily engaged in the defence of Port Moresby and along the Kokoda Track. They were outnumbered and against all odds delayed the Japanese advance. By the time they were withdrawn, they could only muster 32 men following its return to Australia. The 2nd 14th Infantry Battalion Association. And this is a battalion raised in Victoria, first saw action in the Middle East from early 1941 until it returned to Australia about a year later. And then after retraining near Yandina, in fact, it was first engaged with the Japanese in 1942 on the Kokoda Track. It was there that Private Bruce Kingsbury, at the cost of his own life, was awarded the Victoria Cross. His was the first VC awarded in the South Pacific Theatre of War. And behind these pipers, the 61st Battalion Association, otherwise known as the Cameron Highlanders, Alan.
Yes, yes. In fact, it's their kilts that our band, the National Servicemen's Band, uses.
And the 61st was first formed in 1938 as a militia unit, and then in 1942 fought in the famous Battle of Milne Bay in PNG.
They're the first to defeat the Japanese, the first reverse that the Japanese had ever had.
Yeah, they were regarded as relatively inexperienced and very much forced to learn on the job as they tenaciously slowed and then, the way I've read it, stopped the Japanese forces there.
Any sort of battle that through history that you read about that happens in Papua New Guinea, if you just look at the terrain of Papua New Guinea, the stark mountains and the unbelievable thick jungle, you couldn't even imagine how these men and women were able to do anything back then against the Japanese as part of World War II. It's an amazing story to read about and to still have that lineage too.
And this is the 31st Battalion Association and the 51st Infantry Battalion Association.
So 51st Battalion still in existence on the order for battle today. We've got the 51st Far North Queensland Regiment, which is based out of Townsville up in Queensland, plays a very important role in the protection of our borders to the north, and also has a very strong connection with the Indigenous community, the Indigenous making up the vast majority of their numbers.
And doing extraordinary work, as you talk about that, Richard. Served in World War I, World War II. The 31st and the 51st. And they were known as military or militia units, in fact, the 31st and 51st. And the Australian Army Training Team, the Vietnam Association, along with the Young Diggers. This is the first Australian unit into Vietnam and effectively the last out. It also has the most distinguished honour of being the most decorated Australian Army unit, with 4 Victoria Cross recipients, those being Major Peter Badcoe, warrant officers Ray Simpson and Kevin Wheatley, and Keith Payne. It's actually 50 years ago that Keith Payne was gazetted as VC. He's now 85 years of age. He led his company to safety under heavy fire and organised the rescue of many wounded soldiers. He in fact received his VC from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II aboard the Royal Yacht Britannia when it was docked in Brisbane back in 1970. Many of his colleagues highly decorated as well. Just over 1,000 served across 10 years in Vietnam, of which 33 were killed and 122 were wounded. This is the 161st Independent Reconnaissance Flight Association, formed at the RAF base at Amberley back in 1965. The flight arrived in South Vietnam with the first Australian elements to become an integral part of the 1st Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment Group. It became an independent unit in 1967 and operated in a number of locations during the closing stages of the Vietnam War. The flight flew in excess of 72,000 hours with the unit call sign, Possum. And this is the Australian Army Aviation Association.
So the modern day aviators, with the brigade headquarters being 16 Aviation Brigade based out of Brisbane at our Gallipoli Barracks. They've got units that are spread all throughout Australia, each unit specialising in a different type of aircraft, be it the Black Hawk, be it the Chinook, or be it the attack reconnaissance helicopter. Needless to say, very highly skilled individuals to fly, but also maintain and support these helicopters.
The Australian Intelligence Corps Association, just coming into shot there now. Effectively, you don't necessarily hear about the honours associated with the group because it's not shouted from the rooftops.
No, the less you hear about these guys, the more work and the better work that they are doing. But they work tirelessly around the clock with all sorts of organisations, really keeping us safe, keeping us informed, and making sure that we have our actions going in the right direction.
Our national president and the Chief Marshal of the Parade was in the Intelligence Corps, Major Earl Jennings.
And we just saw the chaplains move down Adelaide Street as well, serving such an incredible role. Not often you think about the chaplains of the Army, but the work they do, Richard.
The chaplains are such an important part of our welfare system and our support system for our soldiers and the soldiers' families as well. Beyond just the sort of religious support that they provide this pastoral care where 24/7, if you need someone to talk to, or you need some sort of support, the chaplain's going to be there. That's why we deploy a chaplain to everywhere we go overseas, but most importantly, the support here back in Australia as well.
The massed bands of Brisbane brass marching down Adelaide Street, followed by the Army Transport Association. Raised in 1903 as the Australian Army Service Corps, renamed the Royal Australian Corps of Transport in 1973 when it absorbed the Engineers Transport Section. Supplies troops by land, sea and air, served in World War II, post-war conflicts as well.
No army in history could move without its support and supply train. They mechanised it.
Oh, that's so true. Mobility on the battlefield, without Transport Corps to help us assist with that, we can't go anywhere.
Well, in staying with that transport theme, this is the 85th Transport Squadron Vietnam Association. Initially operated under the name of Wheels Across Vietnam, and you talk about that transport movement. Sometimes after its deployment, this group became known as the Road Runners.
Yeah.
There probably weren't too many roads either.
Maybe that should be Dirt Road Runners or Dirt Track Runners.
No, that's where tracks came into great use. They didn't think the tanks could operate in Vietnam, but they could because of the conditions. So they were pretty tough conditions for transport.
Weren't they what? Here we have the Air Dispatch Association. And the Australian Army Medical Corps, the association for which was formed in 1984. The unit itself first raised in 1903.
And then the Boer War in South Africa, yes. We had more casualties in 3 years in the Boer War than we had in 13 years in Vietnam.
The medics that serve today, I refer to them as the angels of the battlefield, which I get a bit of flack for because it sounds a bit funny, but they carry more equipment because they have to carry all the medical supplies. They walk as far and go as close to the enemy as everyone else, but they have the top of everything they have to do. They have the task there, just being ready. If anyone gets injured, they're the first there to support them, putting their own safety on the line, at a moment's notice. I have so much respect for the medics, the medical corps, and everything they provide us.
Yeah, that includes the 11th Field Ambulance as well. The association just moving through previously, and that ability to set up a field hospital in close confines, being able to treat wounded soldiers, offer those medical assistance services, wherever you may be, that takes real skill.
It really does take an amazing amount of skill. I've been in the field before, and someone had a sore tooth, and they said, "Oh, just head down to 0 Charlie, and you can see the dentist." I'm like, how do we have a dentist here? Well, the field hospital has deployed, and we have all the facilities that you need to have to maintain soldiers in the battlefield. it takes not only the highly trained men and women that serve every day, but there are also the reserve members out there, the highly specialist surgeons that are out there running their own practices. They also sacrifice their time to be army surgeons to support it, so that they can provide a surgical capability in the field as well. So it takes all walks of life to put this thing together, and it really is the uniting of such a strong team.
We see the City of Brisbane Pipe Band making its way down Adelaide Street. And many of these bands doing multiple laps as part of the Anzac Day Parade for 2019. You look at that shot of City Hall, blue skies up above.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Just a couple of clouds around. And
I'm sorry.
go for it, Alan.
Richard, a question. Would you prefer to march behind a brass band or a pipe band?
Well, Alan, I'm not going to be able to give you an answer that's not biased, because the 2nd Battalion has an amazing pipes and drums,
Yes.
and I was the officer commanding in charge of the pipes and drums. So I would always say pipes and drums because it's in my blood. But I can tell you right now, I've been to so many different functions and so many different parades that were supported by bands just like the Brisbane Army Band.
Yeah.
People should be paying to buy tickets to watch these guys and girls play. They are amazing musicians, and they provide a great service for us. So Alan, I think I would have to say pipes and drums, but a very close second would be your normal sort of brass band.
Well, I'll agree with you, because I was in the Scottish Regiment.
Oh, there you go.
And I
And there is a Super Hornet somewhere in the air above us, which has just flown over the parade here in the Brisbane CBD. I know it's been doing laps across the state to different Anzac Day services, but just coming over here, overhead in Brisbane. This is the Royal Australian Army Dental Corps Association, which just celebrated their 76th anniversary last week. The unit has served in many theatres of war to provide emergency dental care, obviously, like the Medical Corps.
That's exactly right.
and the Nursing Corps, which was also formed in the Boer War, 1903.
Here we see the Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps Association, which was formed, the association itself, in 1985 with retired personnel interested in fostering, and again we talk about that comradeship that you want to continue on for those veterans who have returned home. And to one of the largest Army Corps, the Royal Australian Electrical Mechanical Engineers Association, known as RAMI. These soldiers are certainly craftsmen at what they do.
These soldiers, RAMI, you've never met a corps that is more proud of what they do. The craftsmen able to fix, put together engines and all sorts of things. These individuals, without them, nothing would be functioning in essence. So
it's effectively to repair and
right.
recovery support for any form of Army equipment.
Exactly. And the thing that I love most about RAMI, and it's these little quirks that come with the traditions and cultures of being in the Army. Those three colours that you see on their banner, that blue, that yellow, that red, you'll find them hidden everywhere. They'll put their little flag colours and their little banner colours because they're so proud, and they rightly should be proud of the amazing work they do.
Well, you know their motto: if it moves oil, if it doesn't, fix it.
It is the third largest of the corps in the Australian Army, with around about 4,500 serving members, RAMI. You talk about them being so proud of what they do, but the Army wouldn't be moving without the personnel you see walking down the streets, marching down Adelaide Street today.
And I think I've said that a few times now. If you didn't have them, we couldn't do this. If you didn't have those guys, we couldn't do this. I think the theme here is that the Army takes everything. It takes all arms to the Army. It's the combat arms, the logistics arms, the support arms, to do not only what we've done throughout all of our history, but what we do today. Every single person, regardless of the type of service they give, full-time, part-time, we're a part of this total force. We are an Army in motion, and we need every part of the Army to maintain that motion.
We see St Paul's School Band and then the Australian Army Catering Corps. As they say, an army marches on its stomach.
Absolutely. The caterers or the cooks of the Australian Army are second to none. Now, I know I'm heavily biased, but I do love a feed, and I can tell you right now, I have never in my entire career had a bad meal from Australian Army cooks. I can put my hand on my heart and say that. I have plenty of bad meals, but when there's an Australian Army cook behind it, I've been incredibly pleased.
I even hear you were serving with one particular cooker in East Timor who wasn't a bad breakdancer either.
We had a cook in East Timor at a platoon patrol base, and he was into breakdancing and using nunchucks. And every morning before he cooked breakfast, he would give us about a half-hour display of this. He was a quirky guy. It takes all sorts, but again, second to none the service that he provided for us and for this country.
From the Catering Corps to the Military Police Association, the South Queensland branch, MPs seen in action in all areas of conflict where Australia has been involved, including peacekeeping missions, providing also security support for VIPs and the like.
Yeah, so the MPs play a very important role, not only the maintenance of discipline and security of our bases, but they also, in a deployable role, support us with the movement of traffic, getting people around the battlefield, and as you said, the close personal protection of our very important people.
The Officer Training Unit Association, we're just seeing move past the dais here, raised in 1965 in New South Wales to support the regular army to supply officers for the Vietnam War effort. This was achieved through what was a very hard, intense 21-week infantry course.
It's no surprise. History, training units of the past for officer training and training units of today for the Army, that's the Royal Military College Duntroon. Only the best of the best go there to train and support the trainees and future leaders of tomorrow.
The National Servicemen's Memorial Pipe and Drum Band leading the Nashos, Alan.
Yes, indeed. This is my mob. we represent two different eras. In the 1950s, we did 3 months training, and then we did 2 years in the CMF, in the Navy, Army and Air Force. In the 1960s, it was a call-up only for the Army via lottery, and that's what started the controversy over national service. Mother said, why is my son serving and yours not? But we're proud of our service, and on Anzac Day, as I said, we march with pride.
You certainly do.
And you never forget. And all of us who've served, you never forget it.
And as we saw the band wearing the Cameron Highlanders tartan, those two separate intakes into the National Service Program, Alan, where did you fall amongst those?
I was in the 1950s. I was called over in 1958, and after I completed my national service in the Army, I actually wanted to go to the Navy, but I wound up in the Army. And I then was in the Byron Scottish Regiment and then in the 9th the Moulton Regiment. And I marched in these parades.
The Australian Peacekeepers and Peacemakers Veterans Association now. It was in 1947 that 4 peacekeepers were sent to the Dutch-Indonesian War. Since then, over 66,000 Australians, including federal police, have completed a number of UN missions in 64 countries. The blue beret is their sure sign, Richard.
That is, the going overseas and supporting the UN comes with wearing that bright blue beret, not to be confused with Australian Army Aviation. And you wear it with pride because, you know, Australia is a part of the UN. We support the missions overseas and we provide a very unique input into it. You know, everyone always talks about that Australian that was part of my UN team. We are certainly characters when we go overseas, and it's greatly appreciated.
And we see now the Vietnam Veterans Motorcycle Club with their leather vests on, the emblem a skull, wearing a slouch hat, formed on Long Tan Day in February of 1990. Major Richard Thapthing, thanks for being a part of our Anzac Day coverage in 2019 as we look at the Army contingent, those who are serving today, those deployed overseas, and the work of veterans and the associations. All the best for the rest of your Anzac Day.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
Major Richard Thapthing from 7th Brigade, based here at Gallipoli Barracks at Enoggera. And from the Army contingent, it is the sky blue shirts of the Royal Australian Air Force that are coming down Adelaide Street in Brisbane. Formed in 1921, the RAF is the world's second oldest air force, with a large base at Amberley, just outside of Brisbane, here in southeast Queensland. And joining us in commentary is Flying Officer Megan Ryan. Megan, thanks so much for your time on this Anzac Day.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us who's leading the Air Force contingent today.
So we have Group Captain Sandy Turner leading today, with the Parade Warrant Officer for Air Force being Warrant Officer Corey McGregor. Our RAF Ensign Bearer is Flying Officer Luke McGrath, and the Ensign Escorts are Flight Sergeant Michael Godfrey and Flight Sergeant Daniel Scott. A little interesting fact is that the RAF Ensign can only be paraded when no colours are paraded, and when an ensign is paraded on Anzac Day, it takes on somewhat of a colour status and is such to have armed 2 escorts.
And we see the Beaufort Squadrons Association here, followed by the Pathfinder Force as well. So at Amberley, Megan, just who do we see based there at the moment?
So 23 Squadron is the base squadron at Amberley, which is led by CO 23 Squadron, which is Wing Commander Mark Thompson, and the squadron leader is Warrant Officer Pete Fowler.
Why is there a naval officer in the RAF contingent? There was a naval officer there in the RAF contingent on service or on
well, we do
exchange?
have a lot of people based at RAF Base Amberley, which does not just include Air Force, it also includes Army and Navy as well.
Ah, that's it, yes. Just seems unusual to see a... He's not Australian either.
And so these Air Force personnel in front of us,
Yes.
are they based at Amberley, Megan?
Yes, they're all based at Amberley. So all the RAF units marching today are based at RAF Base Amberley.
And a variety of aircraft that you'd find there as well, from, what is it, the FA-18 Super Hornet. We saw one of those just go over about 10 minutes ago.
Yes.
Through to the Growlers.
Yeah, we have the Growlers. We also have the C-17s.
Known as the Globemasters.
Yes, known as the Globemasters, so C-17 Globemasters. We also have the C-27J Spartans as well. We have a number of aircraft at RAF Amberley at the moment.
This is St. Peter's Lutheran College Band. The instruments polished specifically for the Anzac Day Parade. As we see more of the Air Force come down Adelaide Street in Brisbane.
Is that your commanding officer?
I know, so we have 33 Squadron down there at the moment, and they are the Strategic Transport and Air-to-Air Refueling Squadron. So they have our KC-30A, so our air-to-air refuelers. It was originally formed in 1942 for service in World War II and was based at Townsville.
And now the number 35 Squadron, based at Amberley as well.
Yep, so the commanding leader of 35 Squadron today is Wing Commander Benjamin Poxon, and the warrant officer is Ralph Clifton. So 35 Squadron was formed at RAF Base Pearce on the 11th of March 1942. It's now a tactical battlefield airlift, aeromedical evacuation, search and rescue. It also does parachuting of troops, airdrop of equipment, and humanitarian relief tasking. Its aircraft is the C-27J Spartan, and recent and current operations include the North Queensland Flood Assist and support of the Solomon Islands election. A fact about 35 Squadron is that it moved from Richmond at the start of this year, which involved moving 260 Squadron members and their family, 10 aircraft and tons of equipment over the Christmas break.
And now to be based right here, just outside of where we are in Brisbane. This looks like, is it number 36 Squadron?
Yeah, so 36 Squadron. So 36 Squadron is our squadron that flies our C-17A Globemasters, which are a strategic airlift and pretty much logistics backbone of our aircraft in the Royal Australian Air Force. So C-17s, they allow our RAF to rapidly deploy troops, supplies, combat vehicles, heavy equipment including helicopters all over the world. They can also be refueled by the KC-30 in flight, which is from 33 Squadron, and it's been a massive integral part of disaster relief and humanitarian missions over the last few years.
Yeah, the C-17, the Globemaster, was it involved in some of that relief effort in northwest Queensland this year?
So based in for the Townsville floods. Yeah, so at the start of this year we had the Townsville floods, and 36 Squadron and their C-17s, as well as 23 Squadron, which is the squadron based at Amberley as well. We were involved in, so I'm part of 23, we were involved in sending about 72 tonnes worth of food rations and water up to Townsville in support of those floods. From my understanding, there was about, let me just check, we had about 2,800 ADF members involved in supporting those missions.
Yeah, Task Force 646 across the Army, Air Force and Navy.
Yeah.
And you know, the C-17, a long departure from what would have been the DC-2, the Douglas DC-2, which is what the number 36 Squadron was first flying when it was raised in March of 1942. Then in the 50s, the Hercules came along, and now we see the C-17 Globemasters, which entered service in 2006.
Headquarters Combat Support Group was formed in 1998, and the current commander is Air Commodore Veronica Tyler. So the role of Headquarters Combat Support Group is to prepare for and conduct combat support for air-to-air operations. So it involves 95 Wing, which is expeditionary, 96 Wing, which is our national support bases, and also Health Services Wing. The CSG has a proud history of making major contributions to recent ADF operations around the world. It's also played a significant role in providing humanitarian assistance, including medical and evacuation assistance after the Bali bombings, tsunami reliefs in Sumatra, evacuation operations in Lebanon, and rebuilding of cities after Cyclone Larry.
And this looks like the number 2 Security Forces Squadron in front of us right now.
Yes, so it's got Wing Commander Mark Sartori and Warrant Officer Anthony Bell. So 2 Sec 4, as we call it, was formed on the 10th of April 1945. It's vital asset protection, so it's responsible for our close personal protection and our military working dogs, as you can probably see. They're very cute, very, very effective dogs. So their current operations have included APEC Assist, which is the PNG elections, as well as HADA support and the Commonwealth Games security.
Oh yes, just last year. Amazing to think that was only 12 months ago now. So you have the Air Force dogs,
yes,
explosive detectors, military working dogs,
yes,
a key part of the Air Force.
They're a massive attraction for people when they come and look at the Royal Australian Air Force. Everyone loves the military working dogs.
And the Health Services Wing, comprising of the number 1 Expeditionary Health Squadron, the number 3 Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron, and the Health Operational Conversion Unit.
Yes.
There's quite incredible history associated with this too.
Yeah, so our Health Services Wing was stood up on the 21st of December 2001 under Combat Support Group. So it provides a sustainable, trained force that provides military health supports, specialising in aerospace operations with a focus on aeromedical evacuation. So it's helped a lot in the Middle East and Op Resolute, which is our border protection, as well as a number of humanitarian assistance programs over the years.
And that includes here in Queensland after, you know, whether it be Cyclone Yasi in the north of the state, even including the evacuation of patients from Bundaberg Hospital in January of 2013 as we saw the waters of the Burnett River rise to record levels.
Yeah, exactly. Some other ones include Op Fiji Assist, Op Pacific Assist, Op Nepal Assist, Op Philippines Assist, and Defence to Aid to the civil community, so a lot there.
The St Mary's College Band making the trip down the range from Toowoomba to be joining you on this Anzac Day Parade for 2019 here in Brisbane. And Megan, as a flying officer within the RAAF based at Amberley, what does your role actually entail?
So currently I'm officer in charge of Air Movement Section. So we're responsible for ensuring that passengers and cargo are loaded onto and also unloaded off our major aircraft. So it's pretty busy. We were involved, as I said before, a lot in the flood relief. But yeah, taskings we also send people on taskings around the world in mobile air load teams and also on deployments as well. So very busy in Queensland.
Never a dull day.
No, it's very exciting, and I'm very lucky to have that job. So.
How did you come to join?
The Air Force?
Yeah.
So I was based here in Brisbane. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Some recruitment came to my school, talked about ADFA, which is the Australian Defence Force Academy in Canberra, talked about Air Force and logistics, and I was like, that's me. That's what I want to do.
And now here you are.
And here I am.
Megan, what's the proportion of women now in the Air Force? High? Is it high?
I don't know the exact figure, but I know it's one of the highest out of the 3 services, and it is increasing. So I'm a bit biased. I love the Air Force, so I know that for us, women are increasing.
I noticed, yes, very high percentage of senior officers in your RAF units.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is a true example of, Brisbane and its role in the military, given that we've HMAS Moreton at Bulimba for the Navy, Gallipoli Barracks at Enoggera for the Army, and then RAF Base Amberley, which serves a number of functions. As you say, the aircraft moving in and out on a daily basis. If you live nearby, well, you certainly hear them, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Queensland Police Pipes and Drums Band, which celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. I think the best job would be as the bass drum player, other than the weight of the bass drum itself. And the skin
that
of
gives
those
new meaning to being on the beat.
and those skins of the snare drums, so tight to get that bounce you need in a pipes band.
How do you know so much?
Might have hit a drum or two in my time, Alan. Alan Callaghan from the National Servicemen's Association, Craig Zonka and Flying Officer Megan Ryan with you as the Air Force Associations parade down Adelaide Street in the heart of the Brisbane CBD with the sun shining brightly on the RAF Airfield Defence Association of Australia. Awarded the Ground Combat Badge by the Chief of the Air Force in 2014 for their role in all conflicts from World War I to present. The badge takes pride of place in the centre of the association banner. The association itself was formed in 1987 with members serving in World War II in Borneo, South Vietnam, Cambodia and Timor-Leste, Kuwait, Iraq and Afghanistan more recently. The No. 2 Squadron Association, formed in Egypt in 1916, the No. 2 Squadron, was sent to the Western Front in France and Belgium. Reformed then in 1922 into what is now the Royal Australian Air Force. It was disbanded until 1937 before reforming as we headed into World War II.
Yeah, so 2 Squadron now is actually based at RAF Base Williamtown, which is in New South Wales, and flies the Wedgetail aircraft.
It's also the only squadron of the RAF to have battle honours from 4 wars: World War I, World War II, the Malaysian Confrontation and the Vietnam War. This is No. 3 Squadron, RAF Association for Queensland, formed at Point Cook in Victoria back in 1916, first raised, served in World War I in France and held the military funeral for the German ace, the Red Baron, in fact in 1918. In World War II, served in North Africa, Malta, Sicily, Italy and then post-war in Malaysia. And this is the 9th Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force Association. Formed in January of 1939, operating the Seagull, Mark V and the Walrus aircraft from Royal Navy, Royal Australian Navy and Royal New Zealand Navy warships in many theatres of war in World War II.
I actually saw one of those. It flew around below Kirra Hill when I was at school, the Walrus, because it was an old big biplane with a pusher engine, pusher propeller. And this thing chucked past and up way up the coast. A Walrus flying over the Royal Australian Air Force.
One of those images you'd never forget either, Alan.
No, you don't. I mean, you didn't see too many aircraft, but this one was absolutely unique.
This is the Mackay North State High School band, marching for the 25th year in the Brisbane Anzac Day Parade. I think almost it's fair to say the largest band that we've seen come down Adelaide Street.
There's 92 players. They actually have 130 They've played overseas, as I said, in Beijing and at Disneyland. A very competent band.
A couple of sousaphones just moving past the Governor Paul de Jersey at the dais. And in fact, after the parade today, receiving a special award as well for their service in coming down each and every year.
Yes, they are. Here we are. I always wanted to know how could the Viet Cong miss the caribou? You know, it was so slow, and you could hear it coming for miles. You know, you'd think they'd all be waiting.
And now we just see it on a banner.
Yeah, no, marvellous aircraft, though. Absolutely marvellous.
This is the 35th Squadron Association and the RAF Transport Flight Vietnam Association.
It could get in and out of very tiny fields, and when you watch one land, you know, boom.
And that's something pretty special, whether it be bringing supplies, further troops, further personnel.
Yes.
It's that manoeuvrability that is so critical in military operations.
But that was the price. It was a very slow aircraft, and that's what I mean. You wonder how they could miss, because it couldn't fly high either. But it was a great aircraft.
We're just seeing the 38 Squadron Association come into view as well. Its motto is equal to the task. And few RAF units have equalled the variety of operations on which the 38 Squadron has been engaged. It's a transport unit formed in 1943, saw service during World War II, transporting supplies and personnels between Australia and the combat zones in New Guinea and Borneo using Douglas Dakota aircraft. Following the war, the squadron conducted regular courier flights between Australia and Japan in 1947 and 48, and was then deployed to Singapore from 1950 to 52, supplying Commonwealth forces engaged in the Malayan emergency and undertaking courier flights across Asia. The 463, 467 Squadrons Association, they have incredible history going back to the Lancaster Squadrons operating throughout Europe, formed just prior to their efforts in World War II.
That may explain why Flight Sergeant Vivian Dixon, who's on the Coolangatta State School Memorial, was killed serving with the Royal Air Force over Bulgaria. They were bombing the oil fields and also Sofia, the capital.
In flying their Lancaster bombers, they flew more than 6,000 missions, dropping 29,000 tonnes of bombs. Here's the RAF Association of Queensland, the National Servicemen's branch. You were talking earlier, Alan, about the fact that for the Nashos, they had a choice in the original intake, whether it be Army, Navy or Air Force.
No, you didn't have a choice. They just told you which one you were going to be in.
Yeah, so much for a choice.
I wanted to be in the Navy and I wound up in the Army. But no, these were all allocated to the Air Force. Most of them served at Amberley, and most of them are proud of their service, like all national servicemen. It was compulsory, but we felt it was service to Australia.
And now, would this be the Australian Air Force Cadets, Megan?
Yeah, that's correct. So the Australian Air Force Cadets is an aviation-focused youth organisation which is sponsored by the Royal Australian Air Force. So they conduct a number of activities including flying, fieldcraft, adventure training, firearms, safety training, drill and ceremonial, service knowledge, aeromodelling, navigation and gliding.
Can I ask, were you a member of the Cadets before you joined?
I was not a member of the Cadets, no, I wasn't.
Megan, thank you so much for your time today in commentary.
Thank you for having me.
Talking through the operations of the Air Force, what happens at Amberley, and some of the future aircraft they'll be operating as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Flying Officer Megan Ryan joining us as the Anzac Day Parade of 2019 winds its way through the streets of the Brisbane CBD. And now it's to the Allied Forces Associations, whether it be, in fact, there will be a contingent from India, you'll see later on, the Royal Marines Association, the British Ex-Servicemen's Association as well. And I'm just trying to pick up whether this band is the City of Bundaberg band, as it's listed on our order of march. And we see the British Ex-Services Association, formed in 1941 for the primary benefit of all ex-service men and women who have served in British forces. The aim for the association is to, where possible, rehabilitate, assist and provide fellowship for all members who fought across all theatres of war. And our thoughts to the family of Vic Fitch, who passed away last year. Vic had led the British ex-services from his wheelchair at the parade in 2018. He joined the Royal Artillery at the outbreak of the Second World War, and having advanced as far as Belgium, Vic was part of the British Expeditionary Force that was pushed back by the German advance to Dunkirk in 1914. He was then involved in the D-Day landings at Normandy as well, and his efforts will never be forgotten.
Yeah, I was just mentioning before the Royal Naval Association.
Yes.
Between 1788 and 1901, Navy in Australia meant Royal Navy, until we formed our own Commonwealth, Australian Commonwealth forces.
Of course.
There were colonial naval forces. Queensland had one with 2 gunships, but basically it was the Royal Navy.
And there's no mistaking the French Army veterans in Australia. The French Army, Navy, Air Force, and also members of the French Foreign League.
Yes.
80,000 French fought at Gallipoli.
Yes, it's not generally realised that it wasn't just us and the British. There were the French, there were the Indians, there was a Ceylonese unit, and there was also the Jewish Mule Corps also volunteered to serve at Gallipoli. We tend to think only of Anzacs.
Well, that's right, and you speak of the Indians who were there on Gallipoli Peninsula, and we're just seeing their association branch come through now from the Indian Defence Forces.
Yes, yes.
And they say it is so important to be here today to mark that connection between Australia and New Zealand forces and what transpired in Turkey during the First World War.
Yeah, and it wasn't just us. Yes, there were others there as well.
Yeah, they say that 15,000 Indian professional soldiers fought alongside the Anzacs.
Yes.
They suffered more than 1,500 casualties.
One that was also there was a Newfoundland battalion, when Newfoundland was still a colony of Britain. It wasn't part of the Canadian Federation. And that battalion was wiped out at Gallipoli and then on the Western Front. Virtually lost all 1,000 men.
And that's it, our efforts across, whether it be World War I, World War II, and in conflicts since. We have not been alone in those.
No, we haven't. Apart from the Kiwis always being there, and the British and the Americans, there have been many. The Poles have always fought with us. The French Free Forces fought with us. The Rhodesians and South Africans, who we'll see in a moment. We tend to forget this. It was a world war effort.
And here we see the Rhodesian Veterans Association, which was formed in 1979, the association itself.
Yeah, the country is now called Zimbabwe.
Of course.
But they served in the Boer War, World War I, World War II, Suez, and many of them are now migrated to Australia. That's why we see them marching here.
And it was the Brisbane Boys College Band in front of the Rhodesian contingent. Behind them, the band is from the Brisbane Grammar School.
I like on the top of the Rhodesian banner, Matabele Land, 1895.
And it's a big thank you to all the bands from various community groups, whether they be schools, brass band association, Queensland pipes and drums groups that are involved in a parade like Anzac Day. Without them, it'd be hard to keep time with your left and your right.
Yes, yes.
Here we see the South African Military Veterans Organisation of Australasia. Had extensive service in both World Wars. In fact, over 230,000 volunteered for service in World War I. And then in World War II, almost 350,000 volunteered for full-time service.
Yes. They served in East Africa, North Africa, Sicily, Italy. Some of the, the really hard battles on the Italian peninsula, the South Africans were at that. That bombing the Romanian oil fields, that was what Vivian Dixon was doing too, when he was shot down and killed.
We're just seeing the American Legion.
Where would be now if the Americans hadn't come to our aid in World War II?
It'd be a very different Australia that we're talking about.
Yes.
The Polish Ex-Servicemen's Association, Army, Air Force and Navy. A worldwide body established in 1945 with headquarters in London for this association, has branches in 20 countries on 5 continents. The Australian Association was raised in 1947.
These were the ones who got out of Poland when the Nazis invaded it to serve in the Free Polish Forces.
And there was the amazing work, quite unbelievable in fact, of the silent and unseen who were dropped into occupied forces into Poland.
Yes.
The association honours those who, even against all odds, charged ahead in their fight for freedom.
The Nazi occupation of Poland was ruthless. They massacred many. They tried to wipe out the Jewish community. No wonder there was such a strong resistance to them.
But the bravery associated in dropping in behind enemy lines.
Yes. I was doing a history of women in war, and some of our operatives, like Nancy Wade, dropped into France under constant danger.
We see the Hellenic Ex-Servicemen Association here. So, of course, from Greek or Cypriot origin, who have served in the Australian, Greek or Cypriot Armed Forces. A sub-branch of the RSL in Queensland.
Yes, and during World War II, the Greeks gave great aid to our Australian and New Zealand army fighting in Greece when we were fighting against the Germans against quite overwhelming odds, and we finally had to evacuate. But without the aid of both the Hellenic forces and the Greek people, we would have lost many more.
And this is the Turkish Veterans Association.
And TOC H. TOC H was formed on the battlefield in World War I as basically a support service for servicemen and women by supplying rest and respite and also other aids and comforts to the forces.
And this would be the Timorese contingent.
Yes, this is from Timor-Leste. They're all veterans of the liberation forces in East Timor, and it seems that they have chosen Brisbane, by the look of it, as the place they like to march on Anzac Day. And of course we helped in their move for freedom.
We certainly did, and many serving personnel from Brisbane units that went into East Timor during that particular time.
An interesting thing is we managed to maintain afterwards good relations with Indonesia. In fact, they easily could have gone, quite badly.
And this is the Republic of Vietnam Air Forces Association of Queensland, marching down Adelaide Street now.
Yeah, it's often forgotten the part that the South Vietnamese army played in its own war. I mean, they were outnumbered by the North Vietnamese, and that's why we sent forces in to help. But it was one of those really horrific, nasty civil wars in effect.
Oh, and the reaction that there was in Australia to our participation in the war cannot be forgotten either, and how returned veterans were treated at that particular time as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's now died away, but yes, at the time it was quite a bit of division. The Vietnamese community has settled into Australia and has become very Australian, but they're still proud of their origins and their traditions. They have a memorial down underneath the Story Bridge.
And it's always so heartening to see descendants of veterans from all conflicts represented on a day like today, marching proudly in recognition of a father, a mother, a brother, a sister, an auntie, an uncle, a grandfather, a grandmother.
Yes, my dad served, and so did 3 of my uncles in World War II. We were lucky; they all came home. But yes, it is. You can be very proud of what our sailors and soldiers and Air Force men and women achieved during World War II. We weren't a big nation, but we certainly pulled our weight.
Oh, without a doubt. And whether that be tracing family history to a relative who fought in the Boer War, World War I, World War II, the amount of travelling that Australians do around the world now, paying their respects in Gallipoli. In fact, after the Brisbane Anzac Day March, we'll be taking it to the dawn service in Gallipoli, followed by the dawn service at Villa Bretna as our commemorations for Anzac Day 2019 continue across the screens of ABC TV.
Here's a question for you. Where is Australia's northernmost war grave?
Northernmost war grave?
Yes. It's in Russia.
In Russia?
In Russia, yes. They were actually, and he was a VC winner. What happened was that at the end of World War I, they formed a sort of British force to help the White Russians against the communist revolution. And quite a few Australians volunteered, and he was one of them, and he was killed.
The descendants of the Rats of Tobruk, of course, a battle that will never be forgotten by any Australian.
Well, I don't think the Germans will ever forget it. They couldn't quite believe it.
We see the banner of the 2nd 13th Australian Infantry Battalion, with, again, descendants marching behind, carrying the medals of a family member on their right-hand side.
Yes, that's a thing to remember, that only people to whom the medal has been awarded can wear it on the left-hand side. If I wear my dad's, I wear it on the right-hand side.
The crowds down Adelaide Street, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 people deep, all the way along as we peer up towards the Brisbane River.
Yeah. And aren't we lucky with the weather, as you said? Well, raining all week, and it's a beautiful day now.
St Joseph's College of Gregory Terrace taking a slight break in their playing.
Well, I suppose you can't blow all the way around, otherwise you'd run out of breath.
You certainly would. There is no harder task than trying to play and march at the same time as your instrument wobbles and your hand in front of your face.
Well, now you know why the bagpipe has a bag.
And, just as you come to me and I'm motioning up as I was still playing a trumpet now in 2019. Those days are long behind me.
But as you said, without the bands, the parade simply would not be the same.
That's right. And now we see the youth organisations led by the Girl Guides who are celebrating their centenary in Queensland this year. Led by their commissioner, Velia Nichols. The Girl Guides have also been awarded the keys to the city of Brisbane. And I guess instilling that attitude of service from a young age. And of course, they have some of the best biscuits around, Alan.
Yes, I like you, I've had some of them.
Yeah, maybe one or two more than I should have at times.
But they were good biscuits. And if they weren't good, you could always use them now to prop the door open or something.
Oh no, they were too good for that in my household.
The Boys Brigade.
Yeah, the Boys Brigade began in Scotland, I think.
I'm not quite sure, but they certainly have been around a fair while.
Yeah. There are some young tackers marching with the Boys Brigade today. Makes me feel old when I say that. The kids of today, Alan Callaghan, showing their respects as well by marching with, whether it be the girl guides, the Boys Brigade, or followed by the Girls Brigade as well.
Well, yesterday I spoke at the Coolangatta State School, which is my old school, and they always invite me down for the Anzac Day address. And there were all the primary school kids all sitting on the floor, from little teenies to the grade 8, and all listened in total silence. And then they laid the wreaths, and they made the wreaths themselves, and it looked so beautiful, you know. And they really have absorbed that Australian ethos that we don't glory in war, but we do pay tribute to sacrifice.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Paying tribute to sacrifice, not glorifying war.
Yes.
And thousands of school students were at Anzac Square yesterday for a special ceremony as well. The revamped Anzac Square, which was a warm-up, you might say, for the dawn service this morning at 4:28. That began. The lights of the eternal flame flickering brightly. And whether it be there or at Currumbin, a massive service now, in Springfield near Ipswich, up and down the Queensland coast and right across the state, north to south, east to west. It could have been an early dawn service for you or to your local Anzac Day parade.
Well, one of my first jobs for the ABC, when I joined the ABC in Brisbane, was to cover the dawn service and this parade. I used to stand out there with a cameraman. No live broadcast in those days.
Well, we have been live across the state for Anzac Day 2019 and the march. Also streaming through Facebook on ABC Brisbane. Hopefully there have been a few hellos as you've given a shout out to someone that you may have recognised marching as well. And the Brisbane March, and indeed all of the Anzac Day marches from around the country, will be available to watch on ABC iView later today. And if you would like to purchase a commemorative DVD of the Anzac March, you can do so as well. Our toll-free number 1300 650 587, or you can visit the website abccommercial.com/library sales. That website abccommercial.com/library sales. And
now we're seeing the military vehicles. I've ridden in a few of these. They are not comfortable. They do not have padded seats, you know, and coffee holders.
I can well imagine. And a big congratulations to the parade marshals, led by Chief Marshal Earl Jennings and the RSL's Southeastern District Branch, who coordinate the activities for the Anzac Day March each and every day in Brisbane. It is extraordinary work that they do.
Craig, I don't remember seeing those in the vehicles I was in. Schoolgirls in straw
I wouldn't
hats.
have thought so. And as we wrap up proceedings here from Brisbane and Adelaide Street, thanks so much for your company on this Anzac Day. May we say, lest we forget.
Death is at your doorstep, and it will steal your innocence, but it will not steal your substance. brothers we will stand and we'll hold your hand, hold your hand. And you are the mother of your baby child, the one to whom you gave life. And you have your choices, and these are what make man great, his ladder to the stars. But you are not alone in this, and you are not alone in this. As brothers we will stand and